Mhm. Just count to 10 for me, please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. My upbringing was one of poverty. As a young man, I was always ambitious and creative. Always wanted to do some type of music or some type of poetry. But I was being pulled between two worlds, my creativity and the negativity in which I lived in. The neighborhood that I grew up in, it was drugs being sold, it was people being shot. I remember you couldn't even go too far up the street without getting jumped because you was outside of your neighborhood. There was always violence. We get taught from this high that you gotta be hard. You don't let nobody punk you. You do this. This is the code of the street. That's the code of the street. Toxic masculinity is the norm, right? And I picked it up. I started doing everything that others in my environment was doing. I started taking chances, like trying to sell dope. Drugs and alcohol kind of stifled a lot of my dreams. As a person, Danielle was way different than what I was used to. I'm used to dealing with girls from a certain demographic, right? And this was like a young girl from the suburbs, right? And she was just so happy and sunny and bubbly all the time, like every time. She kept me out of the streets because she always believed in whatever I was doing. So far as like she pushed my creativity, she kept me grounded and kept me chasing my dreams, making me believe that it was real. Everything was looking good. I was working, I was going to night school, getting my diploma, right? And I was really non-existent in the streets. I was just mostly with Danielle. She was the most excited to be a mother that I've ever seen, right? And I was excited. I was at all the classes to breathe and every prenatal appointment. So we were stoked. We had a big baby shower. So yeah, it was a wonderful experience. I needed money. So I started kind of like trying to, go back out with my friends, go in the streets, go bust a few moves, like trying to like get back into the groove of things. It was just like the hood or the gangster thing to do. That's how my mindset was back then. My friends leave. So I'm going to, get my money, count my stuff up for the day, and I'm going to look for this one particular gun that I had, and I can't find it. Now, in hindsight, I'm drunk, but I'm looking for it, and I can't find it. So I'm looking all around. And Danielle was like, one of your friends might do got it, right? So like now I get pissed. I grab this big gun, right? So now I guess she sees how serious I'm getting. And now she's telling me like, chill, relax, like you gonna find it. I'm like, no, they got me, I done invited y'all to my house and y'all gonna steal this, that, and the third. And I'm still going. I'm more enraged and I got the gun like this. And I'm pointing and I'm telling her like, no, I'm about to go there and I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do that. And as I'm demonstrating, the gun goes off. I kind of like paused for a second. And then I run over to her because I thought maybe she jumped out the way or maybe she's just playing, she's trying to teach me a lesson, all right? So I grab her and I'm holding her and I'm like, stop playing, like get up. And then I feel like blood on my forearm, right? And I kind of was scared to look at first. So then I kind of turned and looked and I seen that she was actually shot. And in that moment, it was shock, right? And when I say shock, I mean like disbelief. Like I don't like this can't be actually real. This can't be actually happening. After that, I done went through a thousand different emotions of what I should do. I started thinking like it was guilt and shame, and it went from shock to panic. I could hear the police coming. And I see the flashing lights. So I go and run the other way, I'm gonna flee, right? And I know this run is probably gonna be short-lived, but I'm panicking and I'm not thinking, I'm just trying to just get away from the situation. So I keep going. What happened, it was just like a deep hurt and regret and remorse, and it changed everything, right? It was the day that I lost everything, right? I lost Danielle. I lost my family, lost my respect. I could probably accept it more if I did something on purpose, but for this to be an action, like why was her life cut short? And why did I have to be responsible for, like, what's the lesson? I always hear people say that everything happens for a reason. And a lot of things changed in my life after that. I stopped drinking and smoking in prison. Now, that led me to finally be able to know myself for the first time since I was like eight or 9 years old, while I wasn't on some type of drug. And after I got clean, I was actually able to grow into the leader that I actually always been. Everything that I do is so that other people don't have to make the same mistakes that I made. And I just want you to know that redemption and reconciliation, right, is not something that's out the picture. It's possible. So I started reading certain books, like on cognitive behavioral therapy and things of that nature, and reading those books on Fertile Mind opened my eyes up to different thinking areas, different communication techniques. I taught people communication skills and conflict resolution skills because I noticed that a lot of people in here, that's what we lack. And starting that program was probably the most transformational thing for me in my personal journey. When I leave here, I want to take the Danielle Project and be able to implement it on a grand scale. So I just see myself getting out and being a thought leader.
In the prison system, Black folks make up nearly 40% of those who are incarcerated. Despite the fact that in Minnesota, they make up less than 7% of the population. We have a dominant narrative in this country that people who have a darker skin are more susceptible to crime. Jamel, he should have never gotten 20 years for what was an accident.
I've seen way too many people take the same path that Jamel took because that was the one that was broad and wide and you were almost pushed down it.
I am Minister Janae Bates, and I'm the communications director for a faith-based and community-based organizing vehicle for regular Minnesotans right here in Minnesota. I met Dantes when we were 16 years old. I call him Dantes as well as most of his family and friends, even though, of course, he's Jamel Dantes Hatcher. He has always had this high level of emotional intelligence, and he really cares about how people are feeling. I had just gotten licensed as a minister. I thought, surely this is God, opening a pathway for me to be able to provide pastoral care to a friend who really needs it. And I got to learn about all of the work that he'd been doing in the prison. For him to use this time, not just as his punishment, but also for preparation, to prepare himself to be the man that he's becoming today. The work that he's doing in the prison really does deserve to get some light outside of the prison. Right now, the prosecutors are in communication with the family of Danielle, and they're talking to them about, what this would mean for them if Dantes were released early.
But we miss her every day.
Absolutely. There isn't a day go by that I don't think about her. And a lot of time we're out driving and we're past the cemetery where she is. And we send her our love.
I just love this one with this smile, because this is how she kind of lived her life.
Absolutely.
With this.
Always has a
Always
great
had a smile. She was kind of a magnet. She had bright spirit some people were drawn to. Dantes was drawn to that spirit as well. Dantes's trial, it was kind of a blur to me. I don't remember what he said, what anybody said. All I remember is sadness. I don't know if I ever really got angry towards him because I felt like he loved her too much to hurt her. He asked for forgiveness. He was saying that it was an accident, that he really didn't mean to kill the woman that he loved so much. And he said he had to find restitution. And he wanted to do something more with his life so Danielle wouldn't have died in vain. He talked about reading the Bible, and I could just see that he was really serious about what he wanted to do, the direction that he was going in. I think he has proven that he is trying to be the best he can be. I'm really happy about the way he has evolved. My prayers, I would say, have been answered. I'm hoping to see Dantes and his wife have a happy life. His wife, she's a wonderful woman, and I see that relationship working out very well. And if there's any way I can help that happen, I'm all for it.
Okay, so I just want to acknowledge we have a bunch of folks in the room. I know we have people from Ohio and from Minnesota. We have people here from Scotland.
I had been praying for a partner for years. And I had been praying with a very long checklist of things that this person needed to be. And he checked all the boxes. I did not put on the list, he probably shouldn't be in prison. But
we have family and loved ones who have joined us from all over.
So we're watching my wedding. You can barely see me, but I'm in this corner and I'm cheesing so hard. I smiled so hard through the entire experience. I would say the most special moment is happening right now. It's when Dantes was telling me his vows. They're incredibly beautiful because he's a poet.
The love of my life. You have made my life so bright. You have picked me up from the deepest depths of darkness. I was a man with rips and tears in my soul.
Oh, but here we go. This is where we tie the knot.
Will you honor and cherish him as long as you shall live?
Oh, yes, I do.
I love you, baby.
Oh, I love you. Janet and Ernest Jenkins were also present, and it was beautiful because they are the grandparents of Danielle. It has been incredible to have their support, and they represent what I really hope for a lot of the world. Truly. We've dreamed about what it's going to finally be like to be able to be together, living together in one place. and Dantes could be out as soon as a few weeks from now. And we are certainly wanting to spend a bunch of time with Cheyenne, Dantes and Danielle's daughter. Because for him, it is so incredibly important to have a relationship with her. When I first heard the name Danielle, I was young. I also thought she was related. I just didn't know how she was related. I found out who Danielle really was to me when I was about 17. And I found out who my dad was at the same time.
Cheyenne, you want some toast? I'm
Yeah.
gonna make some toast, some eggs, toast and bacon.
Are you gonna put it on the?
You can make a sandwich if you want, I don't care. I was not ready to tell her. She was that light that was brought back into my life after Danielle died that kept me going. I didn't feel I needed to tell her until later in her life. My goal was to first set up either counseling or something in place so that when I did tell her, she had somewhere to go for help or had other people to help her.
I found out the truth from my dad's side. I was sent a link, and it was actually a link to my dad's website. He wrote this letter before I knew who he was. And says, I love you, I always have and always will. And he just talked about how, like, one day I will find this, and he hope I will, and that we can start a bond. I was shocked, but I was mainly confused because I had so many questions.
I wish I had been contacted first. Conversation should have went through me first before contacting her. I thought it was quite selfish to just call her or text her out of the blue. But I would say that the situation has panned out pretty well. She does have a relationship with her father now, so she can start that journey with him.
The first time I talked to my dad was on the telephone. I was very nervous. I felt like he was very nervous. I could hear it in his voice. I felt very good after we had our first talk, because that's when I knew that I'm gonna have a bond with him now. I can't know who my mom was, which I wish I could, but I at least want to know who my dad is.
I didn't even see this. He just added these pictures? That's my dad. That's me. Those are my great-grandparents. That's my dad again, that's me, and that's Janae, his wife. Very special days except when we had to leave. That was the hardest part.
Here.
I'm just debating if I want that's enough. Mm-hmm.
It's not enough. The difference between him then and now is that he's grown a lot mentally. I think he has come a long way. But about what happened to Danielle, there really has not been a clear discussion on exactly what happened because I don't know exactly what happened. I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't ready. I want Cheyenne to find out the truth from him. And I think that is something that has to come from him. To face her, to face Cheyenne, and say, this is what I did.
Danielle was shot in the face with a shotgun. But Hatcher denied having any involvement in her death. So I have a trust issue with anything that he has to say. My name is Jeff Cook. I was the lead detective on the Jamel Hatcher murder case. I felt absolutely terrible for the family to have to go through this, as I do with any homicide victim. There are things that can't be unseen by family members, and that her family had to go and find her. You know, it's heartbreaking. The mother was notified by the grandparents that people couldn't get a hold of Danielle, so she took her 11-year-old son, Daniel's little brother, with her, and they came to the apartment. They found that the apartment door was unlocked and entered. They found Danielle laying on the floor between the closet and the bed. They then found the baby on the bed in a bouncy seat. And she'd been sitting there so long and been crying and thrashing around that she almost worked her way out of the seat. The child was left alone for approximately 18 hours.
Investigation. My name is Detective Cook. Okay. You go by Don Tevez, right? Yes. Okay.
When we questioned him, he did a number of things to try to put up roadblocks in the investigation, to try to create an alibi for himself. He said he had been to the apartment earlier in the evening, but he had left and she was fine when he left. He initially said that he had gone to a friend's house, LaTanya Harper, and spent the night there. He not only claimed that he went to Miss Harper's residence, but that he engaged in sexual activity with her that evening. But it was part of the overall plan to create an alibi. That told us a lot about Mr. Hatcher, his cold, calculated nature of going and having sex with somebody after he just killed his baby's mother. So this is LaTanya Harper.
A copy of the statement that you made to us. I want you to read that before we start.
Her assertion initially was that he arrived around 1 o'clock with her there. She then admitted that he didn't get there till around 4 in the morning. Through witness interviews, what we believe occurred that night was Mr. Hatcher and Danielle got into a very heated argument. Several of the neighbors had actually gone and complained to management about the arguing in that apartment. And we believe the argument continued from there on, and that's when Jamel ended up shooting her. It was very frustrating to have the prosecutor's office tell us we didn't have enough. We wanted Mr. Hatcher charged with murder because we learned that Mr. Hatcher had been physically abusive to Danielle in the past. He had kicked her. He was very demeaning to her and talked down to her and was very controlling of her. That gave us a feeling that he was a very callous person when it came to his baby's mother. And perhaps he didn't care for her as much as he liked to make everybody believe he did.
Died. And she says to me, "Auntie, do you ever stop worrying about your child?" And I said to her, "No, baby, you don't." It was an abusive relationship. And I was so happy thinking, she gets it now. She's gonna leave him. And then when it hung up, I was happy. But I shouldn't have been happy. I should have gone over there. I should have picked her up. After Danielle was killed, he ran away and hid. He left a baby. His child. There was no anonymous phone call to the police, to our family. Nothing. So my sister and my nephew have to walk in and find her, the baby crying, and find Danielle. Why? Because he was too cowardly to make an anonymous phone call?
I want to be a beacon of that redemption is possible, right? A lot of things changed in my life. So I started reading certain books, like on cognitive behavioral therapy and things of that nature. And I was actually able to grow into the leader that I actually always been. And through the Danielle Project, I'm actually helping to to switch people's mindsets, right? So I need to take this and be as impactful as possible, make it as big as possible, because every time I do it is a celebration of Danielle, right? Every time I do it, it's my way of keeping her alive and investing in people and being that role model for people. It helps me to keep personally growing, right?
I don't believe that. I don't believe any of that. I didn't know that he was doing classes named after Danielle. That seems like using her name for personal gain. I want to believe everyone's capable of change, but I think he's gotten an education on how to manipulate the system, courtesy of the state. My thoughts on him getting early release and getting my family on board, I don't think that's okay at all. I totally believe that he is using them and that this is some sort of manipulation. My parents believe that it is important for healing. That is their journey. And my sister, she'll do what's necessary to protect Cheyenne and give her what she needs.
This is where I am with Jamal right now. 18 years ago, I would have hunted him down and taken him out myself. But the only thing that stopped me from doing that is my children and Cheyenne. I can't tell people how to heal. Everybody heals on their own time and their own way. But I had to be able to let go of some of that hatred I had. I felt that it was time to give up that diet of wanting revenge, wanting to hate. And I had to support Cheyenne because she wanted to put a face to this person that now she knows as being her father. So I had to deal with that.
I know it's gonna be a million opinions around the world about my story, some good, some bad, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna be that great father. I'm gonna be that great husband. I'm going to do the stuff with the Danielle Project. That's all I can do. In terms of my release, we still waiting on the prosecution. It feels frustrating because I feel I've done everything I can to prove that I'm ready to be released early.
Through our investigation, we learned that Mr. Hatcher had been physically abusive to Danielle in the past. And what we believe occurred that night was they got into a very heated argument, and that's when Jamal ended up shooting her. And he did a number of things to try to put up roadblocks in the investigation. He not only claimed that he went to Ms. Harper's residence, but that he engaged in sexual activity with her that evening. That told us a lot about Mr. Hatcher.
Okay. When you look at the situation, right, it doesn't look too good, right? I was definitely verbally abusive to Danielle. I may have not been like beating her, right? But if me and her get into it, like I would take her and hold her down on the bed or maybe shake her or something like that. But make no mistake, Danielle's death was an accident. I would have never killed her on purpose. In terms of me lying, in the day after Danielle's death, I was so high off of PCP that I don't remember my first interview. But that night, I don't never remember having sex with LaTanya. If something like that did happen, that's terrible. That's terrible. Like I said, I was high, and I don't know. I know after the fact, I did a whole bunch of unsavory stuff, right? Like trying to cover it up or whatever. But I didn't want to go to jail for life or get the death penalty or something like that. So that's what I was hiding. I was hiding the truth. I did it out of fear.
He only cared about himself. After Danielle was killed, he ran away and hid. He left a baby, his child. There was no anonymous phone call, nothing. So my sister and my nephew have to walk in and find her. My thoughts on him getting early release and getting my family on board, I don't think that's okay at all. I totally believe that he is using them. I think he's gotten an education on how to manipulate the system, courtesy of the state.
I can understand where Monica's coming from. In hindsight, like, yes, I was absolutely wrong. I could have made an anonymous tip, but that was the last thing on my mind. I was 19. I was selfish. I was self-centered, right? And a lot of stuff that I did, it probably was to save my own skin, save my own self. And I have to dedicate my life to make amends for that. As far as me using the family to secure early release, me personally, I hadn't even considered the fact, like, this is about the fact that I'm a father who loves his daughter, right? Monica is still in that place of pain and skepticism, right? And I don't blame her. And yes, I have a lot of negativity in my past, but onward has to be my only direction, right? And with Melanie and my daughter and the Jenkins support, I'm gonna do everything that I said that I was gonna do and prove to the world time and time again that I am who I say I am and that my transformation is legitimate.
The first thought that went through my head was, damn, it would be so much easier in life if I were to just kill her and get this over with.
I could have made the choice to try to stop him. I could have made the choice to get help.
I stabbed this guy one single time. That was it.
One split second can determine the rest of your life.
How do you say I'm sorry for taking away someone's loved one?
He came to our house to kill our family.
Oh, fuck. This is where it's gonna get bad.
I said, bro,
I've got these voices in my head.
I'm out to killing and every motherfucker I can get my hands on.
My only regret is that I didn't finish what I started.
People say you're a monster, but nobody stops to think what made us that way.
I don't have remorse for her being dead as a person. I just hate that it was my dumbass who did it.
A single piece of evidence solved a mystery that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. The last photograph ever taken of Elena Voss showed a woman standing beneath a flickering streetlight, her face half hidden by the darkness, one hand holding the strap of a worn leather bag, the other resting near the door of a building she would never walk out of again. For 29 years, that image remained the final known moment of her life. A frozen second before she disappeared into a mystery that would consume investigators, divide a community, and leave an entire city asking the same terrifying question: how could someone vanish without leaving behind a single clear answer? On a cold October night in 1996, the small coastal town of Blackwater Hollow was preparing for another ordinary evening. The streets were quiet. The harbor lights reflected across the dark water. Families locked their doors, restaurants closed their kitchens, and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs became the familiar background noise of a town that believed it knew every secret hidden within its borders. Blackwater Hollow was not a place where people disappeared. It was the kind of town where neighbors knew each other's routines, where a missing face was noticed immediately, where a strange car parked on the wrong street could become the subject of conversation by morning. But before sunrise, everything changed. Elena Voss, a 34-year-old investigative journalist known for exposing corruption and refusing to abandon difficult stories, failed to arrive at the newspaper office where she worked. At first, her colleagues assumed she was late. Elena had a reputation for working through the night, chasing documents, following leads, and sometimes forgetting to sleep entirely. But as the hours passed and her phone went unanswered, concern turned into fear. Her apartment was found exactly as she had left it. The coffee cup from the previous evening sat beside her notebook. A jacket remained hanging over the back of a chair. Her keys were missing. Her wallet was gone. There were no signs of a struggle. No broken locks. No overturned furniture. No obvious evidence that anything terrible had happened. It looked like she had simply walked away. And that was the detail that haunted investigators the most. Because Elena Voss did not disappear like someone running away. She disappeared like someone who expected to return. Detective Marcus Hale was one of the first officers assigned to the case. At the time, he was considered one of the most methodical investigators in the Blackwater Hollow Police Department. He had spent 15 years solving assaults, theft cases, and violent crimes, but nothing prepared him for the strange emptiness surrounding Elena's disappearance. The first 48 hours were critical. Police searched the apartment building, questioned neighbors, reviewed security footage from nearby businesses, and tracked Elena's movements from the night before. They discovered that she had spent several hours at the newspaper office working on an unfinished investigation involving a local development company accused of illegal land deals. The story was never published. Her final article disappeared with her. That single fact transformed the case from a missing person investigation into something far darker. Investigators discovered Elena had been collecting information about a secret network of financial transactions connected to powerful figures in the region. She had interviewed former employees, reviewed public records, and reportedly told a colleague just days before she vanished that she had found something that could change everything. But what exactly she had found remained unknown. Her computer contained missing files. Several folders had been deleted. Her handwritten notes contained references to meetings that investigators could not initially identify. One name appeared repeatedly in her notebook, written only as a single letter, R. For weeks, police followed every possible lead. They searched abandoned buildings along the coastline. They drained sections of nearby waterways. They interviewed dozens of people who had crossed paths with Elena. Volunteers covered forests and cliffs with flashlights, calling her name into the darkness. Nothing. No body. No confession. No reliable witness. No evidence connecting anyone to her disappearance. The case slowly began to develop a terrifying reputation. Residents started calling it the Blackwater ghost case, because Elena seemed to vanish between one moment and the next, leaving behind only questions. Then came the first major break. Nearly 3 months after Elena disappeared, a fisherman discovered her leather bag caught between rocks near an isolated section of the coastline, several miles from town. Inside were personal items, an old notebook, a broken pen, a small recorder, and a photograph. But the most important discovery was something investigators almost overlooked. A small piece of fabric was trapped inside the zipper seam of the bag. At the time, forensic technology was limited compared to modern standards. DNA testing was still developing, and the tiny fragment provided no immediate answers. Investigators preserved it, catalogued it, and placed it into evidence storage. For years, it sat there, waiting. The discovery of the bag reignited public attention, but it also created more questions than answers. If Elena's belongings had been found along the coast, had she gone there willingly? Had someone taken her there? Was the bag placed there intentionally to mislead investigators? Every possibility created another mystery. Detective Hale became convinced that Elena had not disappeared randomly. Someone knew what they were doing. Someone had carefully removed evidence. Someone had created a scene where every answer led to another question. But without physical proof, suspicion meant nothing. The investigation eventually slowed, then stopped. After 5 years, Elena Voss officially became another name added to the growing list of cold cases across the country. Her photograph remained pinned to a board inside the police department long after active searches ended. New detectives came and went. Files were transferred. Reports were archived. The younger officers who joined the department knew her name only because they were told about the case that nobody solved. But Detective Marcus Hale never forgot. Even after retiring, he kept copies of the original reports. He returned to the old evidence room several times, convinced that somewhere inside the thousands of pages and forgotten items was something everyone had missed. Because he believed one thing: a case was never truly dead. Not as long as one unanswered question remained. The years continued to pass. 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Blackwater Hollow changed. Businesses closed. New buildings replaced old streets. Many residents who remembered Elena's disappearance grew older, moved away, or stopped talking about it. But the mystery remained. Every October, when the anniversary of her disappearance arrived, local newspapers published the same photograph of Elena beneath the streetlight. The headline was always similar: 20 years later, the question remains, where is Elena Voss? The public had almost accepted that the truth might never come, until a discovery inside a forgotten evidence archive changed everything. In 2025, during a routine review of old police files, a forensic technician named Sarah Whitmore was assigned to digitize evidence from decades-old cases. Most of the work involved scanning documents and organizing outdated records. The Elena Voss case was one of hundreds. At first, Sarah knew nothing about it. She opened the file expecting another unsolved disappearance. But then she found something unusual. A small evidence envelope labeled simply, Coastal Recovery, October 1996. Inside was the fabric fragment recovered from Elena's bag. For nearly 3 decades, that tiny piece of material had remained untouched. A forgotten piece of evidence from a forgotten investigation. But forensic science had changed. And suddenly, the smallest detail from the darkest night in Blackwater Hollow's history was about to reveal a secret that had been buried for 29 years. Because sometimes, the truth does not disappear. Sometimes, it waits. And sometimes, all it takes is one single piece of evidence to bring an entire mystery back from the dead. A single piece of evidence solved a mystery that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. The discovery inside the old evidence archive did not create an immediate breakthrough. It did not come with a confession, a hidden message, or a dramatic revelation waiting inside a forgotten box. At first, the small envelope containing the fabric fragment looked exactly like what it had always been, a piece of meaningless material collected from a bag recovered along the Blackwater Hollow coastline almost 30 years earlier. But in criminal investigations, history has proven one thing again and again: the evidence that appears insignificant can sometimes become the evidence that changes everything. When forensic technician Sarah Whitmore examined the old evidence file in 2025, she was not searching for Elena Voss. She was not trying to solve one of the town's most infamous mysteries. She was simply reviewing archived materials as part of a department-wide effort to modernize old case records. Yet the moment she read the name written on the envelope, she stopped. Elena Voss. Even after 29 years, the name still carried weight. Everyone in Blackwater Hollow knew the story. The journalist who vanished without warning. The investigation that collapsed into silence. The woman whose disappearance became a symbol of unanswered questions. Sarah had grown up hearing rumors about the case. She remembered newspaper articles showing Elena's photograph. She remembered older residents discussing theories about what might have happened. Some believed she had uncovered something dangerous. Others believed she had left voluntarily. Some even whispered that powerful people had made sure she would never tell her story. But rumors were not evidence. And for decades, investigators had been trapped between suspicion and proof. Sarah carefully opened the envelope and examined the fabric under modern laboratory equipment. The material itself was ordinary. A small dark-colored fiber, torn from an unknown source. 29 years earlier, it had been analyzed as thoroughly as technology allowed. But technology had changed. Modern forensic methods could now detect biological traces that would have been impossible to identify in 1996. The sample was transferred for advanced testing. Nobody expected much. After nearly 3 decades, hopes were low. Then came the result that shocked everyone. A partial DNA profile had been recovered. At first, investigators treated it cautiously. A partial profile was not enough to immediately identify a suspect. It was not a complete answer. It was only a door that had suddenly opened after years of being locked. But when the profile was entered into updated databases, the system returned something unexpected. A possible match. A name. A person connected to the case. Someone who had been questioned in the original investigation. Someone whose story had never fully satisfied detectives. The name was Thomas Reed. For nearly 30 years, Thomas Reed had lived a quiet life outside Blackwater Hollow. He was not a famous criminal. He had never been convicted of a serious offense. He was not the type of person investigators imagined when they pictured the answer to one of the town's greatest mysteries. But his name was not new. In 1996, Thomas Reed had been one of the last people known to have spoken with Elena Voss before she disappeared. At the time, police considered him only a witness, a businessman, a source, someone who had provided Elena with information for her investigation. During the first weeks after Elena vanished, detectives interviewed him twice. His statements appeared normal. He claimed Elena had contacted him because she was researching the land development scandal. He admitted giving her documents but insisted their relationship was purely professional. According to Reed, their last meeting occurred at a small cafe near the harbor, where Elena asked questions about financial records involving several local companies. He told investigators that Elena seemed nervous. He told them she believed someone was following her. Then he claimed he left. That was the last confirmed conversation anyone could verify. At the time, detectives had no reason to arrest him. There was no physical evidence. No witness placing him with Elena after that meeting. No trace connecting him to her disappearance. Only suspicion. And suspicion was not enough. But now, 29 years later, his DNA appeared on evidence recovered from Elena's abandoned bag. The case that had been frozen for decades suddenly moved again. Investigators reopened the entire file. Old reports were reviewed. Old interviews were studied. And the more they looked, the more they realized something disturbing. The original investigation had not failed because there were no clues. It had failed because the clues had never been connected. Detectives discovered that Thomas Reed had changed his story slightly over the years. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone to notice at the time. But small inconsistencies appeared. In his first interview, Reed said Elena contacted him unexpectedly and requested a meeting. In a later statement, he claimed he had arranged the meeting because he wanted to help her. A minor difference, almost meaningless. But investigators now viewed every detail differently. Then they found something else. Records showed that Reed had left Blackwater Hollow the night Elena disappeared. He claimed he traveled to visit a business associate several hours away. The timeline was possible, barely, but it raised a question investigators had never been able to answer. Why leave town that night? When detectives first asked him in 1996, Reed explained that the trip had been planned in advance. The investigators at the time accepted his explanation. There was no evidence proving otherwise. Now, decades later, detectives looked deeper. They discovered that the business meeting Reed claimed to attend had been cancelled 2 days earlier. The information had existed in old records, but nobody had connected it to Elena's disappearance. The case was no longer just a missing person investigation. It was becoming a question of what had happened during the hours after Elena walked into the darkness. Investigators contacted Thomas Reed. He was now in his late 60s. When officers arrived at his home, he appeared surprised but calm. He agreed to speak with them. At first, he maintained the same story he had told for decades. He denied harming Elena. He denied knowing anything about her disappearance. He said the DNA discovery had to be a mistake. According to Reed, he had touched Elena's bag during their meeting because she asked him to hold it while she searched through her notes. It was possible. It was reasonable. And once again, investigators found themselves facing the same problem that had haunted them since 1996. A possibility was not proof. The DNA placed him near the evidence, but it did not explain what happened afterward. The investigation continued. Detectives searched through old archives, interviewed former witnesses, and reconstructed Elena's final day minute by minute. They discovered that Elena had made several phone calls before she disappeared. One call lasted only 37 seconds. The recipient had never been identified. Another call was made to a number that had been disconnected shortly afterward. Then they found something hidden inside Elena's old newspaper files. A document that had been overlooked for almost 30 years. A single page containing handwritten notes. The handwriting was Elena's. The words were incomplete, but one sentence stood out. If anything happens to me, look at the person who benefits. For investigators, those words changed the direction of the entire case. Because Elena was not only investigating corruption, she was investigating someone who had something to lose. And suddenly, the question was no longer just where Elena Voss had gone. The question was, who was desperate enough to make sure she never came back? As detectives reopened the investigation, the town of Blackwater Hollow once again found itself trapped inside the shadow of a mystery it thought had been buried forever. People who had remained silent for decades started receiving calls. Old witnesses reconsidered forgotten conversations. Memories that had faded began returning. And somewhere inside those forgotten moments was the answer investigators had been searching for. A single piece of evidence had broken the silence. But it had also opened a much darker chapter. Because the closer investigators came to the truth, the more they realized Elena Voss had not disappeared randomly. She had walked directly into a secret someone had spent 29 years trying to keep hidden. A single piece of evidence solved a mystery that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. For 29 years, the disappearance of Elena Voss existed as a wound that never closed. It was a case that survived through generations of detectives, a mystery that remained alive not because of new discoveries, but because of the absence of answers. Every cold case has a moment when investigators must decide whether to keep searching or accept that the truth may never be found. For years, Elena's case had been pushed closer and closer to that final decision, until the fabric fragment changed everything. The DNA connection to Thomas Reed transformed a forgotten investigation into an active criminal inquiry once again. But as investigators quickly learned, reopening an old case was not the same as solving it. The evidence had created a path, but that path was covered with decades of unanswered questions, missing records, unreliable memories, and a trail of people who had moved on from the night Elena Voss disappeared. Detective Laura Bennett was assigned to lead the renewed investigation. Unlike the officers who worked the case in 1996, Laura had no emotional connection to Elena's disappearance. She had not witnessed the media storm. She had not walked through the streets of Blackwater Hollow when the entire town was searching for a missing journalist. She had not spent years staring at Elena's photograph on a police department wall. But that distance became her advantage. She approached the case differently. She did not see Elena Voss as an old mystery. She saw her as a woman who had lived a life, built a career, trusted people, and left behind a final unanswered message. The first thing Laura did was reconstruct Elena's final 48 hours. Not the rumors, not the theories, the facts. On October 17, 1996, Elena arrived at the Blackwater Herald newspaper office shortly after 8 o'clock in the morning. According to colleagues, she appeared exhausted but focused. She spent most of the day reviewing documents related to her investigation into the coastal redevelopment project known as Harbour Point. The project had been advertised as the future of Blackwater Hollow, a luxury waterfront district. New businesses, new jobs, a transformation that would bring money and attention to a struggling town. But Elena believed something was wrong. Her investigation suggested that several properties had been purchased through hidden companies before the official announcement of the project. Some local landowners had sold their homes without knowing the true value of what they owned. Others claimed they had been pressured into accepting unfair deals. Elena suspected someone had used confidential information to profit before the public knew what was happening. She was close to publishing her findings. Too close. At 6:42 p.m., Elena made her final phone call from the newspaper office. The call lasted less than a minute. The person on the other end was never identified. After that, she packed her belongings and left. Security footage from a nearby business captured Elena walking toward the Harbour Point district. That was the last confirmed image of her alive. Except for one detail. A second person appeared in the footage. A man standing across the street. The original investigators had noticed him, but they had never identified him. The image quality was poor. The camera angle was limited. His face was hidden beneath a dark jacket and baseball cap. At the time, investigators believed he might have been nothing more than a passerby. Now, 29 years later, Detective Bennett looked at the footage again. She froze the image, enhanced it, studied the movement, the posture, the timing. The man was not simply walking by. He was waiting. The realization changed the entire timeline. Because if someone had been watching Elena before she disappeared, then her final meeting might not have been accidental. She may have been followed. The investigators began searching for every person connected to Elena's investigation. One name appeared repeatedly: Thomas Reed. Before becoming a successful businessman, Reed had worked as a consultant for several companies involved in property development. He had access to information about upcoming projects. He knew how deals were structured. He understood the value of land before most people recognized it. And according to Elena's notes, he was one of the people who provided her with information. But why would someone helping her also become the person connected to the evidence found on her missing bag? That question became the center of the investigation. Detectives interviewed Reed again. This time, the conversation was different. The first time police questioned him in 1996, they treated him as a potential witness. In 2025, they treated him as someone who might hold the missing pieces of a 29-year-old crime. Reed arrived with an attorney. His confidence had changed. He was no longer the cooperative businessman who wanted to help. He was careful. Every answer was measured. When investigators asked about the DNA found on Elena's bag, he repeated that he had touched it during their final meeting. When asked why he left town that night, he said he had forgotten the meeting was cancelled and decided to visit a friend instead. When asked why he never contacted police after learning Elena disappeared, he said he assumed investigators already knew everything. But Laura Bennett noticed something. Thomas Reed never once asked about Elena. Not once. Most people questioned about a missing person wanted to know if the person had been found. They wanted updates. They wanted answers. Reed only wanted to know what evidence police had. It was a small detail. But in a case built on small details, it mattered. Investigators dug deeper into Reed's history. They found that shortly after Elena disappeared, his company had acquired several properties connected to the Harbour Point development. At the time, those purchases seemed unrelated. But now, viewed through the lens of Elena's investigation, They appeared different. Elena had been looking into suspicious land transactions. Thomas Reed benefited financially from those same transactions. The phrase she wrote in her notebook suddenly felt less like a theory and more like a warning. If anything happens to me, look at the person who benefits. But investigators still lacked the one thing they needed: a direct connection. They had motive. They had suspicious behavior. They had DNA. But they did not have the moment when Elena disappeared. They did not know where she went after leaving the Harbor Point district. They did not know whether she was alive after that final photograph. They did not know who else might have been involved. Then, while reviewing old evidence, investigators discovered something hidden in the original police reports. A witness statement that had never been followed up. The witness was a taxi driver named Daniel Mercer. In 1996, Mercer reported seeing a woman matching Elena's description near the abandoned Marlowe warehouse area shortly after 10 p.m. He told police he saw Elena standing beside a dark vehicle. A man was speaking with her. The report was only 3 paragraphs long. At the time, investigators dismissed it because Mercer could not clearly identify the man. The area was poorly lit. The description was vague. And without evidence connecting the location to Elena's disappearance, the lead was abandoned. But when Detective Bennett read the statement nearly 3 decades later, something immediately caught her attention. The vehicle. Mercer had described seeing an older black sedan with a damaged rear light, a detail that seemed meaningless in 1996. But now, after reviewing Thomas Reed's old records, investigators found something impossible to ignore. In October 1996, Thomas Reed owned a black sedan, and it had a damaged rear light. Suddenly, the forgotten witness statement became one of the most important pieces of information in the entire case. The investigation moved toward the abandoned Marlowe warehouse, a location that had been ignored for 29 years. The building had changed owners several times. Parts of it had collapsed. Nature had taken over the surrounding area. But inside those forgotten walls, investigators believed they might finally find the answer. On a rainy morning, police entered the warehouse with search teams. Every step revealed the passage of time. Dust covered the floors. Broken glass covered the ground. Old machinery sat abandoned in corners. It looked like a place where memories disappeared. But then, beneath layers of dirt near the back entrance, investigators found something. Something that had been hidden for almost 3 decades. A small object buried beneath the floor. A piece of evidence nobody knew existed. And when investigators carefully removed it from the ground, they realized the mystery of Elena Voss was about to become far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Because after 29 years of silence, the place where Elena was last seen was finally beginning to speak. A single piece of evidence solved a mystery that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. The abandoned Marlowe warehouse had stood at the edge of Blackwater Hollow for almost half a century, a forgotten structure surrounded by rusted fences, broken pavement, and tall grass that moved with every passing wind. For most residents, it was simply another empty building left behind by a changing town. A place where teenagers dared each other to enter at night. A place where old stories were created because nobody truly knew what had happened inside. But on the morning investigators returned there, the warehouse was no longer just an abandoned building. It was a crime scene. 29 years after Elena Voss disappeared, detectives walked through the same area where a witness claimed he had seen her for the final time. The rain outside covered the sound of footsteps as forensic teams searched every corner, every crack, every forgotten space where evidence might have survived. Nobody expected miracles. After nearly 3 decades, investigators knew the chances of finding anything meaningful were extremely low. But cold cases were built on impossible chances. Sometimes one overlooked detail could change everything. And inside Marlowe warehouse, they found one. The discovery was made near the rear entrance, exactly where the old witness statement had suggested. A small metal object, partially buried beneath layers of dirt and debris. At first, it appeared meaningless. Just a damaged piece of jewelry. A small silver pendant with scratches covering its surface. But when the forensic team cleaned it carefully, the room became silent. Engraved on the back were 2 letters. E.V. Elena Voss. The pendant belonged to her. For the first time in 29 years, investigators had physical evidence proving Elena had been inside the warehouse. The disappearance was no longer only a missing person case. The question was no longer whether Elena had reached that location. She had. The question was what happened after she arrived. The discovery immediately changed the investigation. Detective Laura Bennett stood inside the warehouse holding the old case file while investigators photographed every inch of the area. The evidence was small, but its significance was enormous. Elena had not vanished somewhere unknown. She had been brought to a specific place. A place connected to the person who had become the center of the investigation. Thomas Reed. The detectives returned to the original timeline. October 17, 1996. Elena leaves the newspaper office. She heads toward Harbor Point. She is seen near the redevelopment area. A witness later places her near Marlowe Warehouse. Thomas Reed's vehicle is connected to that same location. And now Elena's personal item is found inside. For investigators, the story was beginning to take shape. But there was still one major problem. The pendant proved Elena had been there. It did not prove who brought her there. It did not prove what happened inside. And it did not prove that Thomas Reed was responsible. The investigation moved carefully. Because after 29 years, detectives knew one thing better than anyone. A theory could be destroyed by one piece of missing evidence. They searched the warehouse again. This time, with a completely different purpose. The first search was for clues. The second search was for a story. They examined the building as if they were reconstructing a final conversation. Where would someone stand? Where would they enter? Where could someone hide something? The forensic team discovered several old markings on the concrete floor. Most were meaningless, but one area near the back wall showed signs of disturbance. The ground had been repaired at some point in the past. Records showed that construction work had been performed at the warehouse in early 1997, only months after Elena disappeared. The contractor who completed the repairs was contacted. His name was Robert Ellis. When investigators found him, he was 72 years old and living quietly outside the city. At first, Ellis claimed he remembered nothing unusual about the project. But after detectives showed him photographs of the warehouse, his expression changed. He became silent. Then he said something that immediately caught investigators' attention. "I always wondered why they wanted that section covered so quickly." The sentence changed the investigation. Ellis explained that in early 1997, he was hired to repair damage inside the warehouse. The request came from a company connected to the Harbor Point development. He remembered that the instructions were unusual. He was told to repair one specific section of the floor. Not because it was unsafe, not because it was damaged, but because someone wanted it sealed. At the time, he did not question it. Construction workers were often given instructions without explanations. But decades later, knowing Elena's case, he admitted something had bothered him. There had been a strange smell inside the building. Something he could not identify. He remembered asking about it. He was told it was caused by old chemicals stored in the warehouse. He accepted the answer. Until investigators returned. The detectives immediately requested the original construction records. They discovered something disturbing. The company that paid for the repairs was not directly owned by Thomas Reed, but it was connected through a series of hidden financial arrangements. Another connection, another piece of the puzzle. The investigation was moving closer. But Thomas Reed was not waiting quietly. When news leaked that police had reopened the Marlowe warehouse search, he hired a public relations consultant and released a statement denying involvement. He called the investigation a desperate attempt to revive an old tragedy with weak evidence. He insisted the DNA connection was meaningless. He claimed the warehouse connection was coincidence. And he repeated that he had nothing to do with Elena's disappearance. But public opinion had changed. The town that once wondered whether Elena had simply disappeared now began asking a different question. What had been hidden for 29 years? Former colleagues of Elena began speaking publicly again. They remembered her final days. They remembered her fear. One colleague, Amanda Pierce, revealed a conversation she had never shared with police. 2 nights before Elena vanished, Elena told her something disturbing. She said she believed someone inside her investigation had discovered that she was close to exposing the truth. Amanda remembered Elena looking over her shoulder before leaving the office. She told me, "The dangerous part isn't what I found. The dangerous part is who helped me find it." That sentence gave investigators another direction. Because if Elena was right, Thomas Reed might not have been the only person involved. Someone else had provided information. Someone else had access. Someone else might have known exactly what Elena was about to publish. Detectives began reviewing every person connected to the Harbor Point project. Developers, investors, government officials, former employees. The list grew longer. Then, buried inside Elena's old computer files, investigators discovered a hidden folder recovered from backup servers. A folder created only days before her disappearance. The title contained 3 words: Final Evidence. Inside were scanned documents, financial records, photographs, names, and one handwritten note. The note was brief, but it sent investigators in a completely new direction. It read, "Reed is not the beginning." The meaning was unclear, but the message was terrifying. Thomas Reed might not have been the person controlling everything. He might have only been one part of a much larger secret. A secret Elena Voss had been preparing to expose before she disappeared. As investigators continued examining the files, they discovered references to another person. Someone whose name had never appeared in the original investigation. Someone who had never been questioned. Someone who had every reason to want Elena's investigation buried. For 29 years, police believed they were searching for the person responsible for making Elena disappear. Now they realized they might have been searching for the wrong person all along. The pendant found inside Marlowe warehouse had answered one question. Elena had been there. But it created an even more frightening one. Who else was waiting for her that night? And why had someone spent nearly 3 decades making sure nobody ever found out? A single piece of evidence solved a mystery that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. For nearly 3 decades, the disappearance of Elena Voss had been defined by one terrifying idea, that she had vanished into nothing. There had been no confirmed location, no final witness with a complete story, and no physical proof connecting her to the moment everything changed. She had become a photograph on a missing person poster, a name attached to a cold case file, a question that investigators carried long after the public stopped demanding answers. But the discovery inside Marlowe warehouse changed that forever. The silver pendant recovered beneath the damaged floor was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a message from the past. It proved Elena had not disappeared randomly. She had been there. And someone had spent 29 years making sure nobody knew. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. The old files were reopened. Every interview, every photograph, every document connected to Elena's final days was reviewed again with a new perspective. But this time, investigators were not searching for a missing woman. They were reconstructing a crime. Detective Laura Bennett knew the biggest mistake in cold cases was allowing new evidence to create tunnel vision. The discovery of Elena's pendant pointed toward Marlowe warehouse, and Thomas Reed remained the strongest person of interest. But she refused to believe the first answer was always the right answer. Because Elena herself had left a warning. Reed is not the beginning. Those words written inside the hidden folder recovered from Elena's computer changed the entire direction of the investigation. Thomas Reed was involved. That much seemed increasingly likely. But Elena believed he was only one piece of something larger. Someone else was behind the information she had discovered. Someone else had benefited. Someone else had the power to hide the truth for decades. Investigators began examining the hidden documents recovered from Elena's computer backup. The files revealed that Elena had been investigating a complex network of property transfers connected to Harbor Point. At first glance, the records looked like normal business transactions. But Elena had noticed a pattern. Several properties purchased before the redevelopment announcement had been transferred through multiple shell companies. Ownership changed on paper, but the same group of people appeared behind each company. The names were hidden. The money was moved carefully. And the people involved had built a system designed to make accountability almost impossible. Elena had spent months following the trail. The deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. One document caught investigators' attention. It was a list of property acquisitions. Next to several names, Elena had written short notes. Pressure, false valuation, threats, refused to cooperate. Then, at the bottom of the page, one name appeared. Richard Vale. For the first time in 29 years, investigators found a name that connected directly to the center of Elena's investigation. Richard Vale was not unknown in Blackwater Hollow. He was one of the most respected businessmen in the region. A man whose name appeared on charity donations, community projects, and local development plans. He had been considered one of the people responsible for bringing economic growth to the town. But Elena's documents suggested another possibility. She believed Vale was the person controlling the Harbour Point operation, the person who benefited the most, the person who had the most to lose if her investigation became public. Investigators immediately began reviewing everything they knew about Richard Vale, and they discovered something shocking. He had never been interviewed in the original investigation, not once. Despite being connected to the very project Elena was investigating, his name had never appeared as a suspect. The original detectives had focused on Thomas Reed. They believed Reed's access to confidential information made him the most likely person involved. But now investigators had to ask an uncomfortable question. Why had Richard Vale remained invisible? Was it because he was innocent, or because someone wanted him to stay out of the investigation? The answer became even more complicated when detectives discovered that Thomas Reed and Richard Vale had known each other for years. They had worked together on multiple development projects. They had shared business interests. They had connections that went back decades. Suddenly, the relationship between them looked different. Thomas Reed was no longer just a businessman connected to Elena. He might have been the link between Elena and the person she was truly investigating. Police contacted Richard Vale. Now in his 70s, Vale still lived in Blackwater Hollow. Unlike Reed, who reacted defensively when questioned, Vale appeared calm. Almost too calm. When detectives mentioned Elena's name, he paused. Only for a second. But investigators noticed. They asked about Harbour Point. He described the project as a success. They asked about Elena's investigation. He claimed she was confused by complicated financial structures. They asked about Thomas Reed. He said Reed had always been unreliable. That answer immediately raised suspicion, because Thomas Reed had spent years protecting himself by claiming he barely knew Elena. Now Richard Vale was doing the opposite. He was distancing himself from Reed. The detectives left the interview without an admission, but they left with another observation. Richard Vale knew more than he was saying. The next breakthrough came from a place investigators never expected. A former employee at the Harbour Point Development Company contacted police after seeing reports about the reopened case. Her name was Claire Donovan. In 1996, she had worked as an accountant for one of the companies involved in the redevelopment project. She told investigators she had information she should have shared years ago, but she was afraid. Claire explained that shortly before Elena disappeared, she had secretly provided financial documents to Elena. Documents showing irregular transfers between companies connected to Harbour Point. She said Elena was preparing a major article. An article that could destroy powerful people. Then Claire revealed something that shocked investigators. The night before Elena disappeared, Claire received a warning. Someone told her to stop talking. She never knew who made the call. The number was blocked, but the voice was clear. A man, calm, controlled. He told her, "You don't understand what you're involved in." For 29 years, Claire had carried that fear. She never contacted police. She never told anyone. Until now. Her testimony gave investigators something they had been missing. A timeline. Elena was not simply chasing a story. She was collecting evidence. And someone knew exactly how close she was. Detectives returned to the evidence recovered from Elena's apartment. They searched again. This time, they focused on items that seemed insignificant. Old notebooks, receipts, personal belongings, anything that might reveal where Elena planned to go that night. Then they found a hidden compartment inside her desk. Inside was a small envelope. The envelope contained a single photograph. A photograph taken outside the Harbour Point construction site. The image showed 3 people standing together. Thomas Reed, Richard Vale, and a third person. Someone investigators had never seen before. before. On the back of the photograph, Elena had written one sentence: "Ask why they were all there." The discovery sent a shock through the investigation, because the photograph was dated the same day Elena disappeared, October 17, 1996, the final day of her life. For nearly 3 decades, investigators believed Elena's disappearance was the result of one person's actions. Now, the evidence suggested something much darker. 3 people, 1 secret, 1 night, and a journalist who got too close to the truth. As detectives attempted to identify the third person in the photograph, another disturbing discovery emerged. The person was not just connected to Harbor Point. He was connected to the original investigation. He had been inside the police department during the first weeks after Elena vanished. And if investigators were right, the reason the case remained unsolved for 29 years might not have been because the evidence was missing. It might have been because someone made sure nobody looked in the right place. A single piece of evidence solved a mystery that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. For 29 years, the disappearance of Elena Voss had been remembered as a mystery caused by absence. There was no clear crime scene. No confirmed suspect. No final witness who could explain what happened after she walked into the darkness of Blackwater Hollow. But now, after decades of silence, investigators were discovering something far more disturbing. The evidence had never truly disappeared. It had been buried beneath assumptions, forgotten records, and unanswered questions. The photograph found hidden inside Elena's desk changed everything. 3 people standing together near the Harbor Point construction site: Thomas Reed, Richard Vale, and a third man whose identity investigators had not expected. Because the third person in that photograph was not a stranger. It was someone who had been involved from the beginning. Someone who had helped investigate Elena's disappearance. Someone who had been trusted with the truth. His name was Daniel Cross. In 1996, Daniel Cross was a senior investigator with the Blackwater Hollow Police Department. He was one of the first officers assigned to Elena's case. He had reviewed evidence, interviewed witnesses, helped coordinate searches, and according to official records, he had spent months trying to find out what happened to Elena Voss. But now, 29 years later, his image appeared beside the very people Elena had been investigating. The discovery created immediate tension inside the police department. Because if Daniel Cross had been connected to Thomas Reed and Richard Vale before Elena disappeared, then every decision made during the original investigation had to be questioned. Every missed lead, every overlooked detail, every unanswered question. Investigators began reviewing Daniel Cross's role in the case. At first glance, everything appeared normal. His reports were detailed. His interviews were documented. His actions appeared professional. But when Detective Laura Bennett examined the case with fresh eyes, she noticed something strange. Certain leads had been closed unusually quickly. The taxi driver's statement about Marlowe Warehouse, the financial records connected to Harbor Point, the possibility that Elena's disappearance was connected to her investigation. All of these paths had been considered and then abandoned. The question was why? Why had investigators moved away from the most important clues? The answer might have been hidden in the original case files. Detective Bennett requested every document connected to the investigation. Thousands of pages were transferred from storage. Reports, photographs, witness statements, internal notes. For days, investigators reviewed everything. Then they found something. A missing page. Inside one of the original interview files, there was a reference to a statement that no longer existed. The document number was listed. The date was recorded. But the actual report was gone. The missing interview belonged to a witness named Paul Mercer, the same taxi driver who claimed he saw Elena near Marlowe Warehouse. But according to the records, Mercer had provided more information than investigators originally believed. The missing page suggested that Mercer had identified a second vehicle near the warehouse, a vehicle belonging to someone connected to the investigation, Daniel Cross. For decades, that information had been absent from the official record. And now investigators had to ask the most uncomfortable question possible. Had evidence been removed, or had someone simply made sure it was forgotten? The investigation into Daniel Cross began began quietly. Detectives examined his financial records from 1996. They reviewed his communications. They looked into his relationships outside the department. What they found created a disturbing pattern. 3 months before Elena disappeared, Daniel Cross had purchased a large property outside Blackwater Hollow. The purchase itself was not suspicious, but the money behind it was. A portion of the payment came from an investment company linked to Harbour Point, the same development project Elena had been investigating, the same project connected to Thomas Reed and Richard Thale. Suddenly, the original investigation looked completely different. Daniel Cross was not just the person who handled Elena's case. He might have been connected to the people Elena was investigating. But investigators still needed proof. A connection was not enough. A suspicious relationship was not enough. They needed to understand what happened on the night Elena vanished. And that meant returning to the final hours of October 17, 1996. The reconstruction revealed something investigators had missed. Elena did not go directly from the newspaper office to Marlow Warehouse. There was another stop. At 9:18 p.m., her phone connected to a signal near the old Harbour Point construction site. That location was less than half a mile from where the photograph was taken. The original investigation had recorded the phone activity, but nobody had connected it to the warehouse. Nobody had considered why Elena would return there. Now investigators believed she was meeting someone. The question was who. Then another forgotten witness came forward. A former security guard named Henry Walsh. In 1996, Walsh worked nights at the Harbour Point construction site. He contacted police after seeing news reports about the reopened investigation. He told detectives something he had never mentioned before. On the night Elena disappeared, he saw 3 vehicles near the construction area: a black sedan, a dark SUV, and a police vehicle. He remembered the police vehicle because it arrived after the others. When investigators showed him photographs of Daniel Cross, Walsh immediately recognized him. "That's the officer," he said. The statement sent shockwaves through the investigation, because it placed Daniel Cross at the same location as Elena on the night she vanished. The officer who was supposed to find answers may have been standing at the center of the mystery. But Daniel Cross was no longer alive. He had died 7 years earlier from a heart condition, meaning investigators could not question him. They could not confront him. They could not ask why he was there. The one person who might have explained everything was gone, but his secrets remained. Detectives searched his former home. His family cooperated. They insisted Daniel had been a respected officer who dedicated his life to protecting the community. They believed the accusations were impossible. But inside an old storage box, investigators found something that changed their opinion. A notebook hidden among personal documents. The handwriting was Daniel Cross's. Most of the pages contained ordinary notes, names, dates, routine information, until investigators reached the final entries. The last pages were written in 1996, the same year Elena disappeared. One entry stood out. Reed knows. Vale controls. But someone else opened the door. Investigators stared at the words, because the note suggested Daniel Cross knew more than anyone realized. He knew Thomas Reed. He knew Richard Thale. And he believed someone else was involved. Someone who had not yet been identified. The final sentence in the notebook was even more disturbing. "I should have stopped it before she found out." For nearly 3 decades, everyone believed Elena Voss disappeared because she uncovered a secret. Now investigators wondered if the secret was much larger. Maybe Elena had not discovered a crime. Maybe she had discovered a network. A group of people connected by money, power, and silence. The investigation entered its most dangerous phase, because every answer revealed another question. Thomas Reed had the DNA connection. Richard Vale had the motive. Daniel Cross had the hidden knowledge. But there was still one person missing. The person Elena believed was the beginning. The person she was truly trying to expose. And as investigators followed the trail left behind by a journalist who refused to stop searching for the truth, they uncovered one final piece of evidence. A recording. A voice from 29 years ago. A conversation that had been hidden all this time. And when detectives listened to the audio for the first time, they realized Elena Voss had known she was walking into danger. She had known someone was watching her. She had known she might not return. And somehow, before she disappeared, she had managed to leave behind one final warning. A single piece of evidence solved a mystery that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. For 29 years, the people of Blackwater Hollow believed Elena Voss disappeared without warning. They believed she had walked into the night carrying only a bag, a notebook, and a dangerous story that nobody would ever hear. But the truth was far more disturbing. Elena knew something was coming. She knew someone was watching her. And before she vanished, she had prepared for the possibility that she might never return. The discovery of the hidden audio recording changed the investigation forever. For detectives, it was the closest thing they had found to a final message from Elena herself. The recording was discovered inside an old storage device recovered from Daniel Cross's former home. Hidden among years of personal files was a damaged digital archive that had been transferred from an outdated recording system. At first, investigators believed the files were corrupted. Most of the audio contained nothing but static, distorted sounds, fragments of conversations, almost impossible to understand. But after weeks of restoration, forensic specialists managed to recover one file. A conversation recorded on October 17, 1996, the night Elena disappeared. The recording lasted only 4 minutes and 12 seconds. But those 4 minutes changed everything. The audio began with Elena's voice. Quiet, controlled, but clearly nervous. She was not alone. A man was speaking to her. At first, investigators could not identify him. The quality was poor. The voice was low. The background noise made it difficult to understand. But one thing was clear. Elena was confronting someone. She was not meeting a source. She was not having a casual conversation. She was demanding answers. The first sentence investigators could clearly hear was Elena saying, "You told me it was only about money." A man responded, "You don't understand how far this goes." The recording continued. Elena accused the person of hiding information about Harbor Point. She mentioned names. She mentioned documents. She mentioned evidence she had collected. Then came a sentence that caused every investigator in the room to stop. "I know about the warehouse." For decades, Marlowe Warehouse had been a forgotten location, a place nobody connected to Elena until the pendant was discovered. But Elena knew about it before she disappeared. She knew something important was there. The question was how, and why did she never reveal it? The conversation continued. The unknown man warned Elena to stop investigating. He told her she was making a mistake. He said powerful people were involved. But Elena did not sound afraid. She sounded determined. That was what everyone who knew her remembered. Elena Voss was not reckless. She was not someone who chased danger for attention. She was someone who believed the truth mattered more than comfort. Then, near the end of the recording, investigators heard something unexpected. Another voice. A second man entered the conversation. The audio became unclear, but detectives could hear enough to recognize something important. The second man was not surprised to see Elena. He was not confused. He was expected. Someone had arranged the meeting. Someone had brought multiple people together. And Elena had walked directly into a situation she may not have fully understood. Then the recording ended. No scream. No struggle. No obvious sign of violence. Just silence. A silence that lasted 29 years. The discovery forced investigators to rebuild the timeline again. This time, they focused on the minutes after the recording ended. Who was present? Who left? Who had the opportunity? The answer seemed to point back to the same 3 names. Thomas Reed, Richard Vale, Daniel Cross. But Daniel Cross was dead. Thomas Reed continued denying involvement. Richard Vale refused to comment publicly. The investigation needed something stronger. Something that could connect the voices. The forensic team analyzed the audio. They compared the voices against available recordings. The results were not immediate. The recording was old. The quality was damaged. But after weeks of analysis, investigators reached a conclusion. The first male voice was likely Thomas Reed. The second voice was more difficult. But experts believed it belonged to someone else. Someone who had never been publicly connected to Elena's disappearance. Someone whose identity would shock the community. His name was Victor Lang. In 1996, Victor Lang was the chief financial officer of the company overseeing Harbor Point. He was not a public figure. He rarely appeared in newspapers. He avoided did interviews. He worked behind the scenes. But Elena's hidden documents showed she had been investigating him. Victor Lang had approved several financial transfers connected to the suspicious property purchases. He had signed documents that moved millions of dollars through hidden companies. And according to Elena's notes, he was the person who could explain how the entire operation worked. Suddenly, investigators understood the meaning behind Elena's message. Reed is not the beginning. Thomas Reed was not where the story started. He was only the person connecting Elena to something larger. Victor Lang was the missing piece. But there was another problem. Victor Lang had also disappeared. Not in the same way Elena had, but enough to make investigators suspicious. After Elena vanished in 1996, Lang resigned from his position within months. He sold his properties, closed his accounts, and moved away. For years, nobody knew where he was, until investigators discovered he had been living under a different name in another state. When police located him, Victor Lang was 71 years old. Unlike Thomas Reed, he did not immediately deny everything. He simply said, "I knew this day would come." Those words surprised investigators. They brought Lang in for questioning. At first, he refused to discuss Elena. But after detectives played the restored audio recording, his attitude changed. He became silent. Then he asked one question. "Did you find the warehouse?" The room went quiet, because nobody had told him about the warehouse. That information had not been released publicly. It was only known to investigators. And now Victor Lang had revealed that he knew exactly what they were talking about. It was the first time detectives believed they were close to the truth. Lang eventually admitted he had met Elena that night. He admitted Thomas Reed was there. He admitted Daniel Cross arrived later. But he denied killing Elena. He claimed he had only wanted to convince her to stop publishing the story. He said things became out of control after Daniel Cross arrived. According to Lang, Elena discovered something even bigger than the financial fraud. Something involving law enforcement. Something that could destroy careers. He claimed Daniel Cross was not there to help. He was there to make sure the truth never reached the public. Investigators asked the question that had haunted them for nearly 3 decades. What happened after the meeting? Victor Lang refused to answer. He said he was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if he told the entire story. Afraid of who else was involved. Then he revealed one final detail. A detail that changed the case once again. He said Elena was alive when he left the warehouse. Alive. But not alone. Thomas Reed and Daniel Cross remained behind with her. If Lang was telling the truth, then the final moments of Elena Voss's life had finally been narrowed down. The mystery was no longer about where she went. It was about what happened after everyone else left. Investigators returned to Marlow Warehouse. They searched deeper. They examined areas they had not previously considered. And inside a sealed section of the building, they found something that had survived 29 years. A hidden room. Small, dark, almost impossible to notice. Inside was a collection of items, old documents, photographs, and something that belonged to Elena. Her final notebook. The notebook that investigators believed had disappeared with her. When they opened it, they found pages filled with names, dates, and observations. But the final page contained only one sentence. A sentence written hours before she vanished. "I know who is protecting them." The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. Because Elena had not only identified the people responsible, she had identified the person helping them. And when investigators read the name written beneath that sentence, they realized the entire town of Blackwater Hollow had been looking in the wrong direction for 29 years. The person Elena feared was not a stranger, not an outsider, not someone hiding in the shadows. It was someone the community trusted, someone who had been there all along. A single piece of evidence solved a mystery that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. For 29 years, the disappearance of Elena Voss had remained one of Blackwater Hollow's darkest unanswered questions. A journalist vanished while investigating corruption. A town searched. A police department investigated. Families waited for answers that never came. But now, after nearly 3 decades, investigators were standing inside the place where Elena's final secrets had been hidden. The hidden room beneath Marlow Warehouse had changed everything. Inside that forgotten space, covered by layers of dust and time, investigators discovered the final pieces of Elena Voss's investigation. Her notebook, her documents, her evidence, everything she had collected before she disappeared. For years, people believed Elena's work had vanished with her. They were wrong. She had hidden it. She had protected it. And somehow, even knowing she might not survive, she had created a path that would eventually lead investigators back to the truth. Detective Laura Bennett carefully turned the pages of Elena's notebook inside the forensic examination room. Every page revealed another piece of the puzzle. Names, dates, financial records, conversations. Elena had documented everything. She had written about Thomas Reed. She had written about Richard Vale. She had written about Victor Lang. But the final pages focused on someone else. Someone who had never been considered a suspect. Someone whose name appeared repeatedly. Daniel Cross. The police officer who had led the original investigation into her disappearance. The man who had searched for her. The man who had told the town he wanted justice. The man Elena believed was protecting the people responsible. The final pages of the notebook revealed a terrifying possibility. Elena had discovered that Daniel Cross had been manipulating the investigation from the beginning. She had documented missing evidence, altered reports, witnesses who were never contacted again, clues that disappeared from official files. For 29 years, investigators believed the case had failed because they lacked evidence. But Elena's notes suggested something far more disturbing. The investigation had been damaged from inside. Someone had not failed to find the truth. Someone had prevented the truth from being found. The discovery created a crisis inside the Blackwater Hollow Police Department. Old officers who had worked alongside Daniel Cross were questioned. Former investigators were interviewed. Every decision made in 1996 was examined. And slowly, a horrifying picture began to appear. Daniel Cross had controlled access to almost every important piece of evidence in the early investigation. He had reviewed witness statements. He had organized search locations. He had handled reports. He had been the person responsible for deciding which leads deserved attention. And according to Elena's notebook, he had used that power to protect himself and others. But investigators still needed to understand one thing. Why? Why would a respected police officer risk everything to cover up a disappearance? The answer appeared when detectives examined Daniel Cross's financial records more closely. They found hidden payments, small amounts, transferred through different accounts. The transactions were carefully designed to avoid attention. But when investigators followed the money, they discovered the source. Companies connected to Harbour Point. The same companies linked to Richard Vale. The same network Elena had been investigating. Daniel Cross had not simply known the people involved. He had benefited from them. The officer who promised to find Elena's killer had been financially connected to the very people she was investigating. The revelation shocked the community. Residents who had trusted Daniel Cross for decades struggled to accept the truth. He had been seen as a protector, a symbol of law and order, a man who stood beside families during their worst moments. Now, his name was connected to the greatest unanswered crime in the town's history. But investigators still needed to answer the most important question. What happened to Elena after she entered Marlowe Warehouse? The hidden notebook provided clues. Elena had written about a meeting. She believed she was going to confront Thomas Reed. She thought she would finally get proof about Harbour Point. But she had underestimated how many people were involved. One entry described her fear. Reed is nervous. Vale is desperate. Cross is dangerous. 3 names. 3 different roles. 3 people connected by one secret. Detectives returned to Victor Lang. The former financial officer had already admitted being present that night. But investigators believed he was still hiding something. During a second interview, they confronted him with Elena's notebook. They asked why she wrote that Daniel Cross was dangerous. For several minutes, Lang said nothing. Then he revealed a detail that changed the entire investigation. He said Daniel Cross had not arrived at the warehouse by accident. He had been called there by Richard Vale. According to Lang, Vale believed Elena had obtained copies of financial records that could expose everyone involved. They wanted to convince her to stop. They wanted to recover the documents. But when Elena refused, the situation changed. Lang claimed Daniel Cross became aggressive. He said Cross threatened Elena. He said the officer who was supposed to protect the law became the person everyone feared. Investigators asked Lang why he never reported this. His answer was simple: fear. He believed nobody would believe him, and he believed Daniel Cross had enough influence to destroy anyone who spoke against him. But there was still one unanswered question. Where was Elena's body? For nearly 30 years, investigators had searched forests, waterways, and abandoned buildings. They had found her belongings. They had found evidence. But they had never found Elena herself. Without that final piece, the case remained incomplete. Then came another discovery. A hidden note inside Elena's notebook. A note written using a different ink color. A note added shortly before she disappeared. It contained coordinates. No explanation. No description. Just numbers. Investigators immediately recognized the location. An abandoned underground storage facility near the old Harbor Point construction site. A place that had been closed since 1998. A place that no one had searched. The investigation moved immediately. The search team arrived before sunrise. The area had been abandoned for decades. The entrance was hidden beneath overgrown vegetation. The air inside was cold and stale. Every step echoed through the empty underground corridors. Detectives followed the coordinates. Deep beneath the old construction site, they found a sealed door. Behind it was a small storage room. Inside were old containers, broken equipment, and a locked metal box. The box was opened carefully. Inside were Elena's missing research files, photographs, documents, copies of financial records. But there was something else. Something investigators never expected to find. A small audio recorder. The same type Elena had carried during her investigation. The recorder contained one final file. The date was October 17, 1996, the night she disappeared. Investigators listened in silence. At first, there was only background noise, footsteps, voices. Then Elena spoke. Her voice was calm, but the fear was obvious. She knew something was wrong. She knew she was not speaking to people who wanted a conversation. Then investigators heard Daniel Cross's voice. The same man who had promised the town he would find Elena. The same man whose name appeared in her final notes. His words were barely audible, but one sentence was clear. You should have stopped when you had the chance. The room went silent, because for the first time, investigators had something they never had before. Proof. Not suspicion. Not theory. Proof. But before the recording ended, another sound appeared. A fourth voice. A voice nobody expected. A person who had never been mentioned in Elena's files. A person who had been hiding behind the entire investigation. And when investigators identified that voice, they realized the truth was even darker than they imagined. Because Daniel Cross was not the only person inside law enforcement who knew what happened that night. Someone else had helped him. Someone else had protected the secret. And that person was still alive. A single piece of evidence solved a mystery that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. For 29 years, the people of Blackwater Hollow believed they understood the shape of Elena Voss's disappearance. They believed the mystery was about one missing woman, one dangerous investigation, and one terrible night that ended without answers. But the discovery of the final audio recording changed everything. The voice that appeared at the end of the recording was not Thomas Reed. It was not Richard Thale. It was not Daniel Cross. It belonged to someone else. Someone who had never appeared in the original investigation. Someone who had spent nearly 3 decades watching the world search for answers while knowing exactly where those answers were buried. The forensic team replayed the recording again and again. The voice was faint, distorted by years of damage. But the words were clear enough. A man entered the warehouse after Elena's confrontation with Reed and Cross. He spoke calmly, almost casually, as if he was not surprised by what was happening, as if he had been expecting it. The voice said only one sentence. Everything is already handled. 4 words. But those 4 words reopened the entire case, because investigators realized something terrifying. The disappearance of Elena Voss had never been a spontaneous act. It had been planned. The people involved were not reacting to a problem. They were managing one. Detective Laura Bennett immediately ordered a full review of every person connected to the Harbor Point project, the police department, and the original investigation. The search for the unknown voice became the highest priority. And within days, investigators found a name hidden inside old financial records. James Holloway. In 1996, James Holloway was the deputy chief of the Blackwater Hollow Police Department. He was the person who supervised Daniel Cross. He was the person who approved major investigative decisions. He was the person who received daily updates about Elena's disappearance. And according to the evidence now being uncovered, he was the person who controlled what information reached the public. For nearly 30 years, James Holloway had been remembered as the police leader who promised Elena's family that the truth would be found. He had appeared at press conferences. He had spoken about justice. He had assured the community that investigators would never stop searching. But Elena's hidden documents told a different story. She had written his name several times. Not as a suspect. As a question. Why is Holloway protecting Cross? That sentence became one of the most important discoveries in the entire investigation. Because Elena had suspected that Daniel Cross was not acting alone. She believed someone above him was controlling the investigation. Someone with authority. Someone powerful enough to make evidence disappear. Investigators searched through old police records connected to James Holloway. What they found was shocking. Several pieces of evidence collected during the original investigation had been logged incorrectly. Some witness statements had been moved between departments without explanation. Some reports had been rewritten. Some evidence transfers had missing signatures. At the time, these mistakes appeared to be simple administrative errors. But after 29 years, they looked different. They looked intentional. Detective Bennett studied every document connected to the Marlowe warehouse investigation. One pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time investigators got close to the truth, the trail changed direction. A witness was dismissed. A lead was delayed. A document disappeared. And every decision passed through one person. James Holloway. The investigation had not been broken. It had been redirected. The discovery caused another wave of shock throughout Blackwater Hollow. Residents who had spent decades defending the police department began questioning everything. How could a disappearance remain unsolved for so long? How could so many clues be ignored? How could the people responsible stay hidden in plain sight? The answer was becoming clear. Because the people searching for Elena had been working alongside the people hiding her. Investigators located James Holloway living quietly in another state. He was 80 years old, retired, in poor health. When detectives arrived at his home, he did not appear surprised. That detail immediately concerned them. Most people confronted with accusations from a 29-year-old cold case reacted with confusion or anger. Holloway simply looked tired, as if he had been waiting for this moment. During questioning, he denied involvement. He claimed he had only managed the investigation from a distance. He said Daniel Cross was a respected officer. He said Thomas Reed was only a witness. He said Elena Voss had placed herself in danger by investigating people she did not understand. But when detectives mentioned the audio recording, his expression changed. For the first time, he looked afraid. They asked him about the voice. He refused to answer. They asked him about the phrase, "Everything is already handled." Silence. Then Holloway said something that investigators never forgot. "You don't know what you're uncovering." The statement was not a confession, but it was not a denial either. And investigators knew they were finally close. The next breakthrough came from Elena's research files recovered from the underground storage facility. Among the documents was a folder labeled only with a date, October 12, 1996. Inside were copies of internal police communications. Elena had been investigating not only Harbor Point. She had been investigating the police response itself. She had discovered that Daniel Cross and James Holloway had communicated with Thomas Reed before the investigation officially began, before witnesses were interviewed, before evidence was collected, before the public knew Elena was missing. The timeline suggested something impossible. The people assigned to find Elena may have already known where to look, because they knew where she had been, and they knew why. Then investigators found the final document in the folder, a handwritten note from Elena. It contained no accusations, no theories, only a warning. "If they say they are looking for me, Ask what they already know. The sentence sent a chill through the investigation team, because it explained everything. The reason the case remained unsolved was not because nobody cared. It was because the wrong people were controlling the search. But even with this discovery, one mystery remained. What happened to Elena after the warehouse? Who made the final decision? Who was responsible for making sure she never returned home? The answer appeared when investigators examined the final audio recording more carefully. Hidden beneath the voices was another sound. A vehicle. A specific engine. A specific model. A black sedan. The same vehicle connected to Thomas Reed. But there was something else. A second vehicle. A police vehicle. Registered to the Blackwater Hollow Police Department. And according to maintenance records, that vehicle was assigned to James Holloway. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. 3 powerful men, 1 police leader, 1 corrupt officer, 1 business network, all connected to the final night of Elena Voss's life. But investigators still needed the final piece. The piece that could explain what happened after the warehouse. Then, while searching through archived property records, they discovered something hidden in the old Harbor Point documents. A transfer agreement dated 2 days after Elena disappeared. A piece of land had changed ownership. The buyer was a company connected to Richard Thale. The seller was a private trust. And the person who authorized the transaction was James Holloway. The same man who had overseen the investigation. The same man whose voice appeared on the recording. The same man who had promised the town he would find Elena. The case that had haunted Blackwater Hollow for 29 years was finally reaching its breaking point. But as detectives prepared to make arrests, they discovered one final complication. Thomas Reed was missing. His home was empty. His phone was turned off. His vehicle was abandoned. The man whose DNA had reopened the investigation had disappeared just days before the truth was about to come out. And suddenly, investigators faced a terrifying possibility. Someone had known they were coming. Someone had warned him. Someone inside the old network was still protecting the secret. The search for Elena Voss had begun again. But this time, investigators were not chasing a mystery. They were chasing the people who had created one. A single piece of evidence solved a mystery that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. For 29 years, Elena Voss existed as a question. A photograph on a missing person poster. A name written inside a cold case file. A story repeated by people who had stopped believing there would ever be an ending. But now, after decades of silence, the truth was finally moving. Not slowly, not carefully. It was breaking through all at once. The investigation that had remained frozen for nearly 3 decades had become a race against time. Because just as detectives were preparing to expose the people responsible, one of the central figures disappeared. Thomas Reed was gone. His house was empty. His vehicle had been abandoned near an old highway outside Blackwater Hollow. His phone had been destroyed. And inside his home, investigators discovered something that immediately changed the direction of the case. A letter, not addressed to anyone, not signed, just a single page placed on a desk. The handwriting was Reed's. The message was short. I should have told the truth before she disappeared. For investigators, it was the first indication that Thomas Reed was no longer trying to protect himself. He was afraid. The question was why. Was he running because he was guilty? Or was he running because he knew something worse was coming? Detective Laura Bennett refused to assume. After everything they had uncovered, assumptions were what allowed the truth to remain hidden for so long. The team searched every known location connected to Reed. His businesses, his former properties, his financial records. They discovered that shortly before disappearing, Reed had withdrawn money, closed accounts, and attempted to contact someone from his past. That person was Victor Lang, the former Harbor Point financial officer who had already admitted being present the night Elena vanished. Investigators found a recorded message left by Reed, only 15 seconds long. But the words were enough to change everything. Victor, they know about Cross. They know about Holloway. We need to finish what Elena started. The message raised a new question. What did Elena start? The answer came from the files recovered beneath Harbor Point. Elena had not only been investigating corruption, she had been building a case, a complete case. She had collected evidence that connected business leaders, police officials, and financial networks. But the most shocking discovery was that Elena had planned for her own disappearance. Not because she wanted to vanish, because she suspected someone might try to make her vanish. Investigators found a document titled, Emergency Release. Inside was a list of instructions. If Elena failed to contact certain people by a specific date, copies of her evidence were supposed to be released. But the release never happened. Someone had stopped it. And investigators soon discovered how. The person controlling the system had been Daniel Cross. Before his death, Cross had access to Elena's backup files. He had access to the police evidence system. And according to new evidence, he had spent years ensuring Elena's information remained buried. But Daniel Cross was dead. So who had continued protecting the secret? The answer was James Holloway. The retired deputy chief had spent years maintaining the silence. But when detectives returned to question him again, they discovered something unexpected. Holloway was not just defensive. He was desperate. The old police official who once appeared powerful now appeared frightened. He knew the investigation had reached the point where he could no longer control the outcome. During the interview, detectives presented him with the evidence, the financial connections, the altered reports, the missing documents, the audio recording. For the first time, Holloway admitted something. He admitted that Elena's disappearance was covered up, but he denied being responsible for what happened to her. According to Holloway, Daniel Cross was the person who made the final decision. Holloway claimed he only helped contain the damage afterward, but investigators noticed something important. He never said Elena was dead. He never said what happened to her. He only talked about controlling the investigation. That left one possibility. A possibility that changed everything. What if Elena Voss had survived longer than anyone believed? What if the official timeline was wrong? The team returned to the audio recording. They analyzed every sound, every pause, every background noise. Then they discovered something hidden beneath the conversation. A sound they had ignored before. A train. At first, it seemed irrelevant. But investigators checked the area around Marlowe Warehouse in 1996. A freight railway line ran less than 200 meters from the building. And according to transportation records, a train passed through the area at 11:47 p.m. The same time period captured on the recording. The sound proved something important. The recording continued after Elena's confrontation ended. The final moments of the night had never been fully heard. Forensic specialists enhanced the audio again. Then they found another voice. A woman's voice. Weak, distant, but unmistakable. Elena, she said one sentence. Someone has to know. The room went silent. Because for 29 years, investigators believed Elena disappeared into that night. Now they had evidence that she was alive after the first confrontation. She had spoken. She had tried to leave a message. And someone had stopped her. The discovery completely changed the investigation. The question was no longer simply what happened at Marlowe Warehouse. The question became, where was Elena taken afterward? Detectives returned to the hidden storage facility beneath Harbor Point. They searched every document again. This time, they focused on transportation records. They discovered that 2 days after Elena disappeared, a private vehicle connected to Richard Vale traveled to a remote property several hours away. A property nobody had previously connected to the case. The owner, a company controlled by James Holloway. The location was an abandoned medical facility that had closed years earlier. The investigators immediately obtained a search warrant. When they arrived, the building appeared abandoned. Broken windows, empty rooms, dust covering everything. But inside one basement area, they discovered something disturbing. A room that had been recently cleaned. Not decades ago. Recently. Someone had returned. Someone had been there. And they had been searching for something. The forensic team examined the room. They found traces of old documents, fragments of burned paper, and a hidden compartment inside the wall. Inside the compartment was a small box. The box contained Elena's personal items. Her watch, her identification, her wedding ring. Objects that proved someone had kept them hidden for years. But the most important discovery was not the items. It was a document. A confession. Not from Elena. From Thomas Reed. The letter explained everything he had been afraid to say. Reed admitted he had helped arrange the meeting with Elena. He admitted he knew Richard Vale wanted to stop her investigation. He admitted Daniel Cross Voss and James Holloway were involved. But he claimed he never intended for Elena to disappear. He said the plan was only to scare her, to take the evidence, to force her to stop publishing. But something went wrong. Daniel Cross became violent, and James Holloway helped cover it up. The final sentence of Reed's confession was the one that shocked investigators most. "I did not know where they took her, but I know she was alive when I left." For the first time in 29 years, investigators had a consistent timeline. Elena was alive after the warehouse. She was taken somewhere else, and someone had spent decades hiding that fact. The case that began as a disappearance was now officially a criminal investigation involving conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice. But there was still one unanswered question. Where was Elena Voss? The search moved to the final location connected to the cover-up, the abandoned medical facility. And beneath the building, hidden behind a sealed concrete wall, investigators discovered a space that had never appeared on any official blueprint. A place that was never meant to be found. Inside was the final evidence. The evidence that would finally reveal Elena's fate. The evidence that would close a mystery that had haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. But before opening the sealed room, detectives noticed something strange. A message had been carved into the wall. 3 words, written by someone who knew the truth. "Look beneath her." And suddenly, after 29 years, investigators realized they had been searching in the wrong place all along. A single piece of evidence solved a mystery that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. For 29 years, investigators searched for Elena Voss in places where they believed a missing person could disappear. They searched forests. They searched abandoned buildings. They searched the coastline where her bag was discovered. They searched every location connected to the people who had surrounded her final days. But they had always been looking for a place, a location, a final destination. They never considered that the answer might have been hidden beneath their feet. The message carved into the concrete wall of the abandoned medical facility changed everything. "Look beneath her." 3 words. 3 words written by someone who knew the truth. The investigation team stood in silence inside the underground corridor. The building had already revealed more secrets than anyone expected. Hidden rooms, missing documents, evidence connected to the Harbor Point conspiracy. But this message was different. It was personal. It was not a warning. It was not a threat. It was an instruction. Someone wanted Elena's story to finally be discovered. The forensic team carefully examined the concrete beneath the message. The surface appeared ordinary. But after scanning the area with specialized equipment, investigators discovered something unusual. A section of the floor had been repaired. Just like Marlowe Warehouse. Just like the places connected to the original investigation. The same pattern appeared again and again. Hide something. Seal it. Wait for time to erase the evidence. But time had failed. Because 29 years later, the truth was still there. When investigators removed the damaged section of concrete, they discovered a small hidden compartment. Inside was a sealed container. The container was old. The lock was broken. And inside were items that immediately changed the case forever. Elena's final notebook. Several photographs. Copies of documents from Harbor Point. And a letter. A letter written by Elena Voss. The room became silent as investigators opened it. Because after nearly 3 decades, they were finally reading the words of the woman they had spent years trying to find. The letter was not long. Elena wrote it knowing there was a chance nobody would ever see it. She described the people involved. She described the corruption. She described the meeting at Marlowe Warehouse. But the most important part was not about what happened to her. It was about why. Elena explained that she had discovered something much larger than illegal property deals. The Harbor Point project was only one part of a network that had existed for years. Money moved through companies. Officials were paid. Evidence disappeared. People who questioned the system were pressured into silence. She wrote that Richard Vail controlled the financial side. Thomas Reed provided access and information. Daniel Cross protected the operation from inside law enforcement. And James Holloway ensured nobody could challenge them. But Elena also revealed something investigators had never considered. She had not been their first victim. Years before her disappearance, Other people had tried to expose the same network. Some lost their jobs. Some left town. Some simply disappeared from public life. Elena had been following their stories. She believed there was a pattern designed to destroy anyone who got too close. Then came the final pages. The pages written during her final hours. Elena described entering the warehouse. She described seeing Thomas Reed. She described confronting Richard Vale. She described Daniel Cross arriving. But she also described something unexpected. Someone else. Someone she recognized. Someone who had been helping her. The fourth voice from the recording. The person who had entered the warehouse after everyone else. It was not another criminal. It was someone Elena believed was going to help expose the truth. A person who had secretly provided her with evidence. A person who knew the corruption from the inside. His name was Michael Grant. In 1996, Michael Grant was a senior investigator in the State Financial Crimes Division. He had been secretly assisting Elena's investigation. He was the person who gave her the final documents proving the Harbor Point scheme. But Elena discovered too late that Michael was being watched. He had been forced into silence. And on the night she disappeared, he came to the warehouse because he believed he could get her out safely. He failed. According to Elena's letter, Michael witnessed what happened next. Daniel Cross attacked her. James Holloway arrived afterward, and together, they created the cover story that would last for decades. But Michael Grant never came forward because he was afraid. He believed the same people who silenced Elena would destroy him too. The final words Elena wrote were not about revenge. They were about the truth. If someone finds this, tell them I never stopped fighting. The discovery of the letter became the final turning point. Investigators now had a complete picture. They had the evidence. They had the recordings. They had the financial records. They had witnesses. The mystery that had survived nearly 3 decades was finally collapsing. Arrests followed quickly. Richard Vale was charged with conspiracy, financial crimes, and obstruction of justice. James Holloway faced charges related to evidence tampering, corruption, and conspiracy. Thomas Reed was located several weeks later. He returned voluntarily. He admitted his role. He admitted he helped arrange the meeting. He admitted he stayed silent because he was afraid. But he also provided the final information investigators needed. He revealed where Elena had ultimately been taken after the warehouse. The location was the same abandoned medical facility where her final evidence had been discovered. A hidden section beneath the building contained the remains of Elena Voss. After 29 years, her family finally received the answer they had waited for. The discovery brought grief, but it also brought peace. Elena was no longer a question, no longer a photograph, no longer a name attached to an unsolved case. She became a person whose story was finally complete. The trial that followed became one of the most significant criminal cases in the region's history. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors presented a story built from decades of hidden evidence. They showed how money, influence, and power had protected a secret. They showed how an investigation had been manipulated. They showed how one journalist's determination had threatened an entire system. The prosecution's strongest evidence was not the financial records, not the witness testimony, not even the confessions. It was the small piece of fabric recovered from Elena's bag. The evidence that had been ignored for 29 years. The evidence that reopened the case. The evidence that connected the past to the present. A single fragment that proved the truth had been waiting all along. When Detective Laura Bennett later spoke about the case, she said the most important lesson was not about technology or forensic science. It was about persistence. Because Elena Voss had left behind clues. Not obvious clues. Not dramatic clues. Small ones. A notebook. A photograph. A damaged recording. A tiny piece of fabric. Pieces of a story that only made sense when someone finally looked again. The people of Blackwater Hollow eventually rebuilt their relationship with the truth. The Harbor Point project was dismantled. The corruption network was exposed. The officials who protected the secret were held accountable. But for many residents, the most powerful moment came not inside a courtroom. It came when Elena's photograph was removed from the missing persons board at the police department. For 29 years, her picture had represented uncertainty. Now, It represented something different. Justice. The case that had haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades was finally solved. Not because one person confessed, not because one investigator discovered a perfect answer, but because one forgotten piece of evidence survived long enough for someone to find it. A single piece of evidence, a single fragment, a single clue that proved the truth can disappear for years. But it does not disappear forever, because sometimes, the smallest piece of the story is the one that brings everything back. And after 29 years of silence, Elena Voss finally had a voice again.